I'm going to tell you a story that was classified as a secret for decades. The story of a daring POW escape from the Germans during World War II, known as the Crow's Flight. In this video, you'll find out how more than 100 Allied servicemen made their way across Nazi-occupied territory to reach freedom with the help of brave partisan fighters. And you'll find out how you can walk in the path of the Crow's Flight on a life-changing hike through the beautiful countryside of Slovenia. Our story begins here in Maribor, what is today the second largest city in the country of Slovenia. Hitler himself came here in World War II, and standing on the balcony of what is today the city hall, the Führer declared, "Make this land German again."
He came to Maribor. He annexed Maribor to German Reich. It was a harsh time for everyone, and it was really strict. In 41, people were really afraid in Maribor.
Here in Maribor, the Germans set up the camp that would become known as Stalag 18D. And it's here that we meet the unlikely hero of our story, an enlisted man from Australia named Ralph Churches. His nickname was the Crow, a disparaging reference to people from his part of Australia being so poor that they could only afford to eat crow. Australian author Neil Churches tells his father's story in his book, The Greatest Escape.
He grew up in this really poor farm in this really poor area of the poorest state of Australia. And he knew the only way he'd get off the farm was to get a good education. But he was small and he got bullied by all the other boys. And the only way he could get ahead was by being really good at sports. And because he was clever, he was what we call in Australia a smart ass.
Ralph joined the army as a map maker, shipping out to North Africa and later Greece. Captured in 1941, Ralph endured for weeks in Nazi holding camps.
He lost half his body weight, got cholera, malaria, suffered dysentery, survived a 6-day train ride in summer heat up through Serbia, Croatia to what's now Slovenia, arriving at a place that we now call Maribor, but then was called by the Germans Marburg on the Drau.
Once he made it to the camp in Maribor, Ralph regained his health and wasted no time planning his escape.
The Germans were the enemy cricket team and he was going to beat them. So the best way to beat them was to learn everything about them.
The Great Escape. This was the camp. These were the staggering odds.
This is a new camp. It has been built to hold you and your men.
But it wasn't like the Hollywood movie about POWs who dug a tunnel to escape and were nearly all recaptured or killed. The Maribor camp was different. Captured officers were held separately from the enlisted men, like Ralph Churches and his mates. They could leave the camp to do work duty on farms or damaged railroad tracks. And that's when Ralph began teaching himself how to speak German, something he knew he'd have to do to have any chance of escape. Ralph walked away from work duties twice, but was quickly recaptured and sent to a punishment camp, where he discovered the shocking secret of Stalag 18D, an extermination camp for captured Soviet fighters.
And the German policy at the time was not to keep the Soviet prisoners alive, but to kill them as quickly as possible. They were the very first extermination camps, even before Auschwitz and before the German policy around Jewish people was formulated. It was just, we're going to kill all these Soviet prisoners.
Here in the cemetery in Maribor, there is a monument with the names of some of the thousands of Soviet fighters who died in the camp. The conditions in Stalag 18D have been compared to some of the Nazis' most infamous death camps. Prisoners were starved, tortured, or simply left on the ground to freeze to death.
Soviet ones were treated really badly as animals. They were, it was really a harsh winter in 41, 42. They were not getting anything to wear. There were no furniture in the camp. They were just lying on the floor. Also, there were a lot of them were very ill. Food was brought to them just 3 times per week. It was really not enough nutrition. The commanders of the camp, they were allowed to shoot at Soviet ones. They were not allowed to shoot at Allies ones because it could be like a murder. But Soviet ones were not under this Geneva Convention, and if they made something wrong, they could be shot.
So they're dying of starvation, no ventilation, no heating, not enough food. And so Dad's punishment, along with everybody else in the punishment camp, was to go and haul out the Soviet bodies from the barracks, put them in a cart, take the cart to the top of the hill, throw them into a mass grave and pour quicklime over them. He had to do that 2 or 3 times a day for 6 weeks. So that's when Dad decided that he was going to pretend that he had learned his lesson. He was going to be the most compliant prisoner that the Germans had ever seen. He basically made use of the fact that he'd been a bank clerk before the war, knew how to do double entry bookkeeping properly, kept records of all the Red Cross parcel goods that were coming in, and was able to trade them with the local farmers and some of the local Germans for whatever the camp needed to get good food and extra warmth, because the Germans hadn't seen real coffee, real cigarettes, real chocolate or real soap since 1934. So this was just a gold mine. So Dad managed to organise the camp to be the best fed camp in the whole of Germany, probably. And his co-conspirator in this was his assistant translator, Les Laws, who was a jazz pianist before the war. And somehow Dad managed to negotiate getting a grand piano into the camp as part of the morale boost of putting on shows. They also managed to rent the scenery, the wigs, the costumes, and the furniture from the local opera house to put on shows. So it was this crazy luxury camp. But all the time, he and Les were busy trying to find out how to get in contact with the partisans.
By 1944, Ralph was convinced that he could face the same fate as the doomed Soviet prisoners or be killed by the next Allied bombing raid. So he was even more determined than ever to escape. He was able to contact the partisan fighting units in the nearby area and got out with about half a dozen of his fellow inmates, only to decide that he had to go back and save the rest of them.
But he's back at this village in the hills, and there's this bit of party, there's a little bit of alcohol. He's talked to the partisan leadership and he said, you sure you can get us out? And they said, yes, we do this all the time. We get American bomber crews out all the time, and we get escaped prisoners of war out. So, groups of 8, we can do it, no problem. Dad said, well, what's in it for you? And they said, well, we get supplies in exchange for people we get out. This is my father under a little bit of alcohol. His nature comes out and he says, oh, you get supplies. Well, think how many more supplies you'll get for 100 prisoners rather than just the 7 of us. There's a bunch of prisoners who'll be on this work party just over the hill where we left a few hours ago. You can go and pick them up in the morning, and then we can all get away and you'll get lots more supplies.
Actually, we have to know that they didn't escape from Stalag. They were, as every day, they were brought from Stalag by train to the working place, to Ožbal, and from there they escaped. But it was really a miracle how no one knew about it.
Getting away from the camp was the easy part. The whole group would have to cross 100 miles up and down the hills in very steep terrain crawling with Germans. They moved only at night, with no talking and no smoking allowed. The men's worn-out work boots were no match for the rough terrain.
95% of the prisoners didn't want to escape. They were very, very comfortable, well-fed, warm, relatively easy work, a good life. They could just sit out the war. They bitched and moaned and bitched and moaned. What have you done to us? We'll all be killed. We can't go back. You've really screwed us.
The risks were even greater for the partisans who were helping them out, because the penalty could be not only death for themselves, but for their whole families.
It's like in a movie. Some partisans came and they made, let's go. But it was not easy, because they have to cross territory of half Slovenia, from north to south, almost 330 kilometers. But this was a territory that was occupied by Germans. Yeah, and this was not a small group of people, it was a lot of people.
Another huge challenge for the group was crossing the Sava River. Local farmers and their livestock made noise to distract the Germans, while groups of escapees took turns crossing the river in small boats.
And the horses crossing the river gave cover to the noise of 100 prisoners and 150 partisan recruits being rowed over the river in 2 boats, 12 people at a time in each boat. And it took them about 4 hours.
This is near the village of Kresnice, where my Slovenian ancestors are from. I'll never really know if my cousin Antonia was part of the escape effort, but I do know that 2 months later she was with a group of partisans who were killed when they were trapped in a barn that was set on fire by the Nazis.
It's all a bunch of ordinary people, privates, corporals, sergeants, organising themselves, getting together with ordinary people in the countryside of Slovenia and pulling off an extraordinary thing together.
15 days after leaving Maribor, the group of escaped POWs finally arrived in the town of Semič near the Croatian border, only to learn that the partisans' airfield there had been destroyed. They had to wait a few more days for a new airstrip to be cleared, and then DC-3 aircraft like this one took the men to Italy, where finally they were free.
I think that maybe Ralph Churchist asked himself before organizing everything, how far are you prepared to go to get your freedom? And he went really far.
It's kept secret because this was the most successful escape line out of fascist Europe in the Second World War. But it's never been a secret in Yugoslavia. It's been always, and then later in Slovenia, it's always been honoured as one of the great heroic acts of Slovenian culture.
Today, you can walk in the path of the greatest escape with signs to mark the way, although there is some controversy about the exact route. You don't have to worry about being lost or hungry or tired, because there are villages and inns and restaurants and even spas along the way. I've put some links in the video description below so you can find out how to sign up for your level of ability. Everything from casual hikers to adrenaline seekers and corporate team building. Neil Churches says it's a life-changing experience.
The story of the escape, of the planning of it, and finding who your allies are, but you have a reluctant workforce coming along with you that you have to try and drag along with you. I think that is an experience that a lot of organisations have, and actually being able to walk along the trail talking about these type of experiences, it would be transformative. You find what freedom means.
I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please hit the like button and subscribe to the Terry Anzur YouTube channel. Special welcome to our new subscribers from Australia. If you'd like to read more about the greatest escape, I've put a link to Neil Church's book in the video description below. Thanks for watching, and don't be a stranger.